Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to mixed race Louisiana Creole DNA results and discovering Latin American heritage and unknown relative by Creole lady Marmalade. Now this is a channel I'm not familiar with at all. I got a few people recommending this one to me over the past few months, I want to say, and finally was like, okay, let me go ahead and do it because Creole would be very interesting. The channel seems to be focused mostly on her Creole ancestry and Creole culture and a lot of that stuff, so very interesting channel for anyone who wants to learn more about that kind of stuff. But in terms of the DNA, I think it's going to be interesting of what we'll expect. Now, based on what I did see of her, she does look like she's going to probably have a large amount of African ancestry. Also, being that she's Creole, it's probably not going to be that surprising to see a good amount of Native American DNA, indigenous DNA in there as well. And then we're possibly going to see some European in there too. And of that European, it'll probably point towards maybe like a French origin. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think the most exciting thing I have with this video is that it says "and unknown relative," giving me the idea that we're probably going to be talking about DNA matches, which is the best part of these tests. With all that said, let's go ahead and jump on into the video.
Hello, welcome to my video. Hola, ¿cómo está? Bienvenido a mi video. Bonjour, bienvenue. That is just me welcoming you to my video in a few of the languages from a few of the ethnicities that are on my Ancestry DNA results. So let's get into that. I was curious about my particular ethnic makeup because I mean, I'm quite obviously mixed, but I am not like biracial. I don't have like two separate race parents. So it's not quite clear. Both my parents are Creole. They're both mixed. They look like me. I'm multi-generationally mixed. I like to think of myself as the remix. The remix, baby. Because my parents are mixed, my grandparents are mixed, most of my great-grandparents are mixed. We've just been mixing for a long time, so I'm a remix.
Typical Creole family. A lot of mixing, but also a lot of endogamy. So that'll be an interesting thing to see with the DNA matches, because endogamy meaning that the population only having children with others within that same population for many generations. But what makes the Creole and Louisiana Cajun population groups, which have a lot of close ties, obviously, so endogamous is that they're a endogamous population that's coming out of an already endogamous population, that being the Acadians, or, you know, French Canadians, as a lot of people like to think. So basically there was a big group of Acadians that got pushed out of areas of nowadays Canada and pushed down to the areas around the Gulf Coast, and those families kept marrying and having children with those same other families. But with the Creole and Cajun, there was also some mixture of the African and the Native American and some of the other sorts of population groups that were around that area, because it was kind of a large mix of people. So when we see her DNA matches, it'll be interesting to see if we can get an idea of that endogamy by seeing the amount of DNA she shares with her top matches.
I look at us as kind of like people in, Latin America and Brazil and those places like that. They've just been mixing for generation after generation after generation, and you just have a mixed race people. And that's what my family is. So a little bit about me. This is my first vlog thing. I used to do a lot of Instagram comedy skits, but I wanted to get into this too, and I thought talking about my ethnicity DNA result. That train. It's a train outside. So yeah, I thought that would be a really cool place to start, because that is the biggest question surrounding me. I get asked that so much my entire life since I can remember. It's just like a topic of discussion.
I just have to say, she is absolutely gorgeous. Like, gorgeous.
You may not recognize me from the All Black series, A House Divided. I play Brittany on that show. So I'll have people that watch the show and that will hit me up, from seeing me on that, wondering what I am. So I thought it'd be cool to start there. Like I said, I wanted to know, in particular, exactly what we were mixed with and how much of it, and, all that stuff. But what really made me go, I gotta find out this. I'm really curious, is when I was doing my skits a lot, I would get a lot of flack for like appropriating Black culture and for using the N word and stuff like that, and which was crazy weird to me because I'm Black. When people say something, I'd be like, but I'm Black, and most of the time they'd be like, oh, I guess carry on.
This is interesting what she's talking about, because the last reaction I did, assuming that these are coming out in order, was the Jubilee video of ranking by Blackness. And basically, in that video, I talked a lot about how there's this clash of the cultural idea of Black and then the ancestral idea of Black, because culturally Black, especially American Black, is what the focus really be. That isn't quite the same as having African ancestry, which is how you look physically Black. So there's kind of this clash of an idea going on between these two. And I don't think this is an uncommon thing to happen with DNA testing and the way people see themselves ethnically or culturally or however, because when you look at your ancestral breakdown, we all have a much more nuanced ancestry than a lot of us think. And even whatever present day description you have for how you would define yourself, it's not always going to line up with how others are going to define you. And I think this is kind of a great example of that, where, you're talking about someone who's coming from a much more mixed background. So it's much more of a unique thing than just the typical African American. But at the same time, she is representative, in my opinion, of the African American experience. She has African ancestry and she is American. And very likely coming from Louisiana, it's possible that she has enslaved ancestors as well. So coming from the description of what I think most people would think of for African American.
But this one guy, he didn't let that go like that. Like, he took it a step further and he was like, well, if you are even Black, if you're not lying, that little 15% don't count. I was like, you know what? I never thought about that. Like, how Black am I? So in my quest to figure more out about myself, I found out who my great grandma's baby daddy was. You are the father! Yes, my grandma never knew her dad. My great grandma didn't, well, I'm not gonna say she didn't know, but none of the rest of us knew who her baby daddy was. So, and the thing with that part of the family, that's the Black side. Like, and my grandma, she looks like me. Me and my mom, very clearly mixed. So we always kind of wonder, like, where'd she come from? Who's her dad? So when I was in like middle school, me and my mom asked my great grandma, and she said that my grandma's dad was Italian. Italian. And me and my mom were like, okay, that makes sense. So, fast forward all these years later, I took the DNA test in 2018, and on those results, it said I was like 49% Black, which, I'm guessing should be Black enough.
I hope she shows the actual full results and not just that little pop-up.
But these are estimates, so it could be a few percent off. So I say that makes me roughly half Black. And then there's like 45, 47 something percent European. And of course, they had like the Southern Europe, which I knew. And then they had the Iberian Peninsula. And I just thought that was Italy. And it's like, I'm embarrassed because Italy is not in the Iberian Peninsula. I do not know how I let that go over my head. So, but I think it's just because I just thought I was Italian. And so I don't know, I just overlooked it. And just was like, okay, that's Italian. So, anywho, fast forward to a few months ago, I get an email saying that they updated their DNA results. Every so often they'll update them to make them more accurate or, more clear.
So the updates really come from the fact that more studies have been conducted, more things have happened where they're feeling much more reliable with the readings. And even more, what can happen with updates as well, which I believe is something we're going to see with the MyHeritage update, is that they won't just update how they're reading things, they'll actually update on the technology. So what this usually will be is the chip, the microarray chip that they're using. So for anyone who's been on 23andMe, you may be familiar with having the V1 chip, V2 chip, V3 chip, V4 chip, or the V5 chip, which I think is what they're on now. I feel like I've seen stuff about them having a V6 chip or something. But basically, the microarray chips can be updated. They can be testing more markers of DNA or maybe slightly different markers of DNA. And because of those changes, as well as the updates in their research of identifying certain segments of DNA to correlate to certain population groups, those get better over time because the more they study, the more they learn, obviously. And so the sites update as they can. So 23andMe is the one that I believe she's saying that she took that updated. For anyone who's done MyHeritage, they have a big update coming out sometime this summer. They haven't announced the exact date, but it's going to be pretty exciting to see. But basically for MyHeritage, it's often considered the worst when it comes to the ethnicity admixture percentages because a lot of people say that it's the least like what they know of their family tree, whereas they test elsewhere and those actually follow pretty well and are much more similar. So hopefully the MyHeritage update will fix a lot of the issues maybe that they've had.
So I go on there, and of course I see France, but then I see Spain, and I was like, Spain? Who's Spanish? Because I don't know of anyone in my family to be Spanish, Hispanic, and nothing like that. And but then I was like, we are Creole. A lot of Creole people do have Spanish in them from down the line. So I was like, it could be that. But then I was like, and my grandma's dad, he got to be something. So I was like, maybe it's him. Maybe my great grandma. So he had black hair and an accent, and he must have looked exotic, and she must have just said he was Italian. Because she was not with this man, mind you. My family they were not ever a couple or together. I think he tricked off a few dollars. Hey, you know how that go. So, she didn't know him. I don't know. She knew the man's name. But yeah, so when I saw Spain, I was like, let me see who's Spanish in this tree so I can know if I can really be claiming this to the tilt, because I don't want to be one of those reachers. They will have 98% of this and 0.9% of this, and this is the thing they want to claim. They don't know who in their family was this race. They don't know where it's coming from how many generations ago, but they want to claim this. See, I didn't want to be that. So I ended up having my mom take the test because I wanted to see if it was coming from her or my dad's side.
That's a great way to do it. If you take a test and you get a weird result that you're like not quite sure about, especially a small one that we would call a trace result. So usually 3%, 2% or lower. And trace result, not meaning that it's not true, but trace meaning that the confidence that it's true is much lower. So it doesn't mean you rule it out as, oh, that's not true. It's just, okay, it's so low. Could be, there's a higher possibility of it being a misread. But if you get something like that and you want to try to figure out, is it actually coming from somewhere in my family tree? If your parents are willing to test, that's the best way, because one of your parents tests and you notice both of them get it around a small percentage again, your confidence doesn't really move. But let's say mom does it and you notice that she gets twice as much of that DNA than you did. You got 1% and she's getting 2 or 3%. Okay, your confidence just went up a little bit. Still kind of lower because she's also low reading, but it gives you a bit more. But then let's say maybe you get 1%, your mom tests and she gets 5% or 6% or something like that, which is not uncommon to happen. And then you've really got a much better idea of what's going on. So good to hear she's doing this very well. The way she's kind of talking about how she's interpreting the results as well as kind of the process she's going through of doing the family stuff. But hopefully she shows on screen the actual breakdown.
And if it would have been coming from my dad, then that would have been some down the line where I was like, if it's from my mom, then I know it's my great grandpa. And that's close enough for me to feel like I claim it, So I had my mom get tested, and sure enough, she had an even higher percentage of Spanish than I did. And what was a big clue for me was both our Native American was coming from Central America as opposed to like North America. So when I saw hers, I was like, oh, for sure.
Huh.
It's my grandma's dad.
So that is an interesting way of looking at it where, she is coming from a population group that has a lot of known mixture with indigenous Native American. But at the same time, if she's suspecting a Hispanic ancestor, obviously they could be from Spain or Portugal directly. But at the same time, being in Louisiana as well, it's not that far off to think, oh, well, maybe they were coming from Mexico or areas of the U.S. that are previously part of Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, California, lots of Texas, that stuff. So having those together, the Central American indigenous kind of does lead into that. So that's an interesting way to do it. But she hasn't mentioned the exact percentages for the Spanish Iberian, I don't think, or the indigenous, which is kind of what we'd also gauge to figure out, is that about correct? So she's talking about her, I think it was her grandfather's mother, I think it was, or a great grandfather, basically. So we'd be looking at 12.5%. So if her reading of Spanish and the indigenous Central American add up to be about 12.5%, and then for her mom it jumps up to like 20% or higher, or something, between 20 and 30%, I think that would be very indicative that, yeah, it's going to be the great grandfather. But I think one thing to also consider is that he may not have been fully Hispanic or Mexican or whatever himself, but maybe he was partial, and that could kind of give you an idea of it too. But let's continue.
Then I went to dig in even deeper. I'm like, and then we also had those relative matches. And so I was seeing a bunch of relative matches from Nicaragua. I was like, okay, because when I first saw Spanish, I was like, well, what kind of Spanish? If this is my great grandpa we're talking about, I highly doubt he came from Spain. They came from Spain back in the day when they were first settling in Louisiana. But
I don't know about the migration to Louisiana directly from Iberia, but I can say that throughout the years, obviously, there was a constant flow of people from Iberia. So it's not something to necessarily rule out. But if it is something that, it was very rare for someone from Spain or Portugal to come directly to Louisiana or something, then, definitely less likely that that's a possibility, but not something to rule out exactly. But obviously, she's finding hints, if she's finding a lot of cousins in Nicaragua, that, yeah, that could be, where he came from. But at the same time, considering that depending how far out they are in terms of matching, if they're really distant, it might be that, he's not really coming from Nicaragua, but he did come from a Spain or Portuguese family, and then another member of that family ended up in Nicaragua. With a great grandfather, we're not looking at that super far back. So how much she's matching these Nicaraguan matches, that will matter. Hopefully she shows us that.
This is him. We're talking 1950s. I doubt he came from Spain. I'm pretty sure, and especially when I saw that the Central Indigenous, I was like, okay, he's from Central America. He's Latino. He's not like a Spaniard. So yeah, and then I started seeing those relatives from Nicaragua, and I was like, okay, he's Nicaraguan. Makes sense. This is cool. So I was like, I talked to some of them. Some of them didn't speak much English, so I got to brush up on my Spanish. And I just pieced things together. So I was looking through their family trees, trying to find, just piece it all together. I went person by person to see who might have come from Nicaragua to New Orleans around around the 40s or 50s. My grandma was born in 1951. And so I found like a dad and his two grown sons who came to New Orleans around like 1945, something like that. I was like, okay, so it's one of these guys. I don't think it's a dad because when my grandma was born, the dad was like 70. So I was like, I'm pretty sure he's her grandpa. So it's probably one of these brothers. And so one of them, I saw like a lot about him. He plays the piano. My grandma plays the piano. He loves music. Like I found his obituary with all this stuff about him, and apparently like music was the main thing. I was like, that's bananas, because my grandma sings. She plays the piano. My daughter plays the piano. And so I found like the names of his children and grandchildren in the obituary. Then I found his granddaughter on Facebook, and I was talking back and forth with her, and she was saying how her and her mom were on 23andMe. So I had my mom get tested again over on 23andMe to see like how closely she was related to them. Because I was like, this will answer the question for me.
Yeah, because if that is correct, that the one of the sons is her great grandfather, meaning her mom's grandfather, then that means that the granddaughter would be a first cousin to her mom and her first cousin once removed. If I'm understanding all this correctly. So we should see them popping up as a very high up significant match.
So when I had my mom take the test, it came up that her and his granddaughter, which they should be first cousins if they're both his granddaughters, the first result was first cousins once removed. But then underneath that, there was like the second probability is that they are first half cousins. And I was like, they're first half cousins.
But one thing I should mention with the prediction that you see on 23andMe and the other sites where they say it could be about a first cousin once removed or whatever, don't take that as this is exactly what they are, which is, I know a lot of people will do that, unfortunately, and you know, it doesn't seem like she's doing that exactly here. Obviously, she understands that there were multiple, but when you look at those, they're just giving you a prediction based on the general ranges of expected amounts of shared DNA between certain relationship ranges. So when you're a first cousin with someone, there's a certain range that you expect. But the websites aren't always the best with that, because when you look at a certain range, like if you look at someone who shares 150 centimorgans with you, which would be about 2% of your DNA in terms of these tests, well, those are going to be a wide range of relations. It could be someone that's maybe a second cousin, could be someone that's a third cousin, could be a huge variety of other things too, considering removes and halves and things like that. So when it comes to looking at those predictions, like here saying first cousin once removed, if that doesn't quite make sense with what you're looking up for, then you can look into the percentage that they give you. So 23andMe tells you what percentage of DNA you share. Other sites, you'll get the centimorgans, but you can plug that into different relationship predictor tools, basically. So like the Shared Centimorgan Project, and then that'll give you an idea of what are all of the possibilities, how you could be related, because the amount of DNA that you share with different types of relations are pretty similar. And so it's not always that straightforward. But if, from what she's saying, it's matching up. You know, the fact that we're looking at an expected half first cousin, because obviously, you know, their grandfather was the same man. They had different grandmothers. So this is very solid evidence for everything.
She showed up as related to my mom as being a half aunt. They share 14% DNA. You can share like 17% DNA with an aunt. I think that's like the least. But if it's a half aunt, it will be slightly more watered down. So, anywho, I just wanted to put a name and a face on it, and for me, I did. I guess I'm supposed to be talking about my ethnicity results as a whole, huh? I get into this whole story. It's just such an interesting story.
Show the whole ethnicity results.
Finding out who my grandma's dad is. That's crazy. People that had them kind of like, who doesn't know who their baby daddy is in the 1950s?
I get so many people commenting on a lot of my videos about how these DNA tests are scams, don't believe them, don't do this. And then you have stories just like this that go to show all of those people are idiots and don't know what they're talking about. Because DNA tests have proven themselves over and over and over, reconnecting families, solving mysteries from history, as well as solving a lot of very recent mysteries like cold case crimes and unidentified remains and things like that. But for a lot of people that have these small mysteries in their own family trees, that's where this DNA comes in. And while the admixture here was very useful in terms of giving her a hint of what is going on, it didn't paint the whole picture. She had to go through the steps of figuring out, okay, well, I'm getting this Iberian Spanish reading, getting this Central American reading, those seem to be together. And kind of looking at the history of, well, there weren't a lot of people coming straight from Iberia to Louisiana. And so it's, you know, it's this deduction. It's not this clear, you know, oh, this is exactly what it is as the DNA test tells you. No, the DNA test gives you just a general vague idea, and you have to use that to then help you get a clearer picture of things. And she's doing a beautiful job of it by going through the steps, understanding the history, understanding a bit of the variations with the results that you can expect, and then taking the research further by doing more testing and comparisons. And I mean, she's doing a great job. This is the true power of these DNA tests.
So yeah, it ended up being that he's from Nicaragua. It's really particularly interesting to me because I taught myself Spanish as a kid. I've always had this special connection. Like, I've always been into cultures and things in general, but I had this special connection to Latino or Hispanic culture. I think because I identified with them in terms of, what I look like, just the mixture that they have. I always say, Creoles are kind of like the French version of Latinos. Most of them are like Spanish and Native American, and a lot of them have some black. Might have a little bit, might have a lot, but there's usually some black sprinkled in there. And Creoles were French, black, and Native American. So I always felt like we were kind of similar, and I just loved the language, and I just always had this thing. So to get older and find out that I am mixed with a little bit of it, I was like, wow, it's almost like that was there for a reason. That's a crazy journey. And I started all this out as being a DNA thing to show you my results, which I will post here now.
Yay! Okay. So, looking 51.4% Sub-Saharan African, getting a whole big mixture of stuff. Then European, 23% on the Southern European, the 14.3% Spanish and Portuguese, 3.2% Italian, and the 5.5% broadly Southern European. So I think she mentioned she knew of Italian ancestry, so that does match up. And sometimes Italian can fall into the Spanish, Portuguese, Iberian categories. And beyond that, Northwestern European, French and German, that's probably the French, obviously, the British and Irish being 1.5%, and the broadly Northwestern European being 7.5%. I think those may be coming from the French ancestry. There's a question mark of, are those truly British and Irish? Well, I mean, for the 1.5%, I guess, but, for the British and Irish, is it truly British and Irish? And for the broadly Northwestern European, is it just really coming from that French ancestry? Obviously, she could have other European ancestry in her background, especially because with the Acadian populations, yes, they were all mostly French, but obviously there was other mixing in there, here and there, but not a whole lot. So the question really being, is that coming from a true British-Irish ancestry or some other Northwestern European ancestry, or is it really just coming from that likely French? Then we have a 0.4% Ashkenazi Jewish, which my guess is with the Ashkenazi Jewish, that's most likely representative out of her Spanish, Portuguese, Nicaraguan ancestry. Because for people with Iberian ancestry, pretty much all of them have small percentages of Jewish, because historically there's mass conversions of Jews in Iberia as the Reconquista goes throughout and they conquer and push the Moors out. And in a lot of areas, it was about making it Catholic. And while the Inquisition didn't happen until 1492, a lot of smaller Inquisition-like events happened throughout Iberia. 1391 being a massive year for that to happen. And so with that, there was constant conversions and marriages and mixing between these new Jews, these new Christians, and the old Christians. And especially with this happening for hundreds of years, we're talking, starting probably 1100s, 1200s maybe, with a lot of it happening. 1300s ramps up greatly. 1400s ramps up even more. And then obviously 1500s post-Inquisition, all of these new Christian families that used to be Jewish, slowly, as each generation goes on, less and less is known about being Jewish, and they mix more and more. And within just a little bit of time, people don't even realize that they came from a Jewish ancestry, and now they're just Spanish as far as they know. So I'm guessing this is where her 0.4% is coming in, because it's such a small percentage, but being that she only has a small portion of ancestry from Spain and Portugal, which, most of the time with Spain and Portugal, people that we see that have a large amount, they're usually getting 1 or 2% Ashkenazi Jewish, so with this, it certainly makes sense. And then 2.2% broadly European, so it all matches up. But I'm so happy she finally showed this on screen, because I was getting really worried there. They're like, this is seriously one of the best DNA videos I've seen in a long time. But it was like, if she doesn't show it, it's not gonna reach the bar quite. Oh, and there's the Indigenous American. We didn't talk about that. She mentioned that she got it, but all right. So Indigenous American, 1.6%, and then even better, she's getting communities, Managa, Nicaragua. So that is a great hint going along with that. Think about the fact she did not know this until doing the DNA testing. And here we have it, clear as day, in the communities picking up Nicaragua. And I say it a lot with the ethnicity admixture stuff, but really a lot of times those community readings can be some of the most helpful in really clearing up what's going on in certain parts of your ancestry.
The main parts of my results that mean something to me, which, I mean, of course, all of it means something, even the things that are less than 1%, because without all those people coming together at the different points in time that they did, we wouldn't exist. I get it. But as far as me like embracing and feeling connected to, the only ones that I feel connected to, obviously Black. When you're mixed, you're gonna identify to some degree with being Black, and of course that, and then after then they're French. I've always identified with that because I'm from New Orleans. So even if you're not French, you have some interaction with French culture.
Yeah, it really is such a big part. I mean, when I've only been down to Louisiana once in my life. I've been to Mississippi once. I've been to Alabama once, and I don't even think I've ever been to Texas. And while it certainly wasn't all over those states, it definitely, you could notice, especially Louisiana more than any of them, but you definitely notice more French stuff going on. All right, let's continue.
France, weird. France, weird. New Orleans is its own little country within a country. We're pretty different from the rest of America. We say beaucoup. We still use certain words. Our streets are in French. We just have that culture. So, and especially actually having French heritage and being Creole, you definitely feel that connection to that French culture. And then, and then the Spanish, I was always into Latino culture, right? So I myself Spanish. I was always into just, like I said, I majored in Spanish in school. That was always my thing. So to find out that I am mixed with it, and especially after people always guessed that I was all my life anyway, so to be like, damn, I was lying when I said I wasn't. Like,
you just didn't know.
I definitely embraced that, and to be able to put an exact country on it, to know the family member is coming from my great grandpa, who's not like crazy far down the line. I feel like I can connect to that and embrace that, and I'm gonna get more fluent in my Spanish. I never got fluent. I got older, kind of fell off. I didn't graduate college, so I never got fluent. But I speak it with a good accent because I started learning so young. So but I want to, now that I know that I actually am, Hispanic a little bit, I want to really embrace that. I want to get fluent for sure, and I already wanted to start to learn French when I got closer to fluency in Spanish anyway. But I want to learn both of those. And as far as the African countries that I'm mixed with, I think I want to delve into Nigeria. I think because that's like the second highest African one for me.
That one's a pretty common one, is usually a high amount for most African Americans. So I imagine a lot of folks who are watching this video who also have African American ancestry, whether it's a Creole African American ancestry or elsewhere throughout the US, my guess is that, you're probably getting Nigeria as one of your top ones.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that one because I think every Black person that I know that has taken the test, like Nigeria is like their highest or second highest percentage. So there must have been, obviously the slaves came from West Africa, but I feel like a gigantic chunk of them came from Nigeria. And it's just so crazy to be able to now pinpoint, where we come from.
One of the reasons why it's also coming up for so many people at a high amount for Nigeria is just because of the difficulty of being able to get a more nuanced, granular image of ancestry in Africa due to the limitations of testing. A lot of people in Africa don't want to test. The people that are willing to test, it's much more limited. And the other thing is that the way we understand Africa today by the country borders doesn't quite fit the way that African population and genetics have flowed, because with Africa, the focus for long time has been more tribal and things like that, and not in the way that we think today of country lines. So I imagine for a lot of people, part of it is that, a large amount of people that were enslaved had come from West Africa, And because a lot of them came from West Africa, I'm guessing that a lot of them came from tribes that those descendants today have a strong connection in Nigeria. The big question that really is sitting there right now is how many various tribes are there that make up this reading of Nigeria that, with further studying, could actually help in pinpointing a more nuanced view. I know one site that a lot of people have commented about on some of my videos about African ancestry has been African American DNA, or maybe it's African Ancestry DNA. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Let me look it up. Okay, so it's African Ancestry DNA, and this site is a DNA testing site where they test either your Y chromosome if you're a male, or a mitochondrial DNA test if you're female or male, and Y chromosome looking at your purely paternal line, your mitochondrial DNA looking at your purely maternal line. But there's been a lot of issues with this site because, first of all, the testing that they do is very, very low amounts of markers that they're testing. And then with that, they're giving results that are too specific, and almost they're like overselling results that really they aren't backing up very well. And there was a great article written by another genetic genealogist named Shannon Christmas, who's an amazing genetic genealogist, done a lot of great work over the years, most specifically in African American ancestry. And he did a whole article talking about why you don't want to go with African ancestry DNA, and even mentioned how when Henry Louis Gates Jr. did it, that basically they told him that he was connected to some tribe in Africa. And then as he did further studying and working with other geneticists and people, it became very clear that actually his paternal line wasn't African. It was Irish, Scottish, or something like that. Like it was very Northwestern European. And then after that, he stopped using that company. So if you watch a lot of the early stuff with Henry Louis Gates Jr., like Faces of America or African American Lives, I think he uses that company, but it is not a company that I would recommend today. And I don't think there's a lot of genetic genealogists I know who would recommend it. If you wanted to do something like that, your best bet is to do a family tree DNA Y chromosome test, or family tree DNA mitochondrial DNA test, or just do a whole genome sequence test. But unfortunately for these days, I know a lot of people are really trying to figure out that, specific tribe. But unfortunately, at this point, it's just going to be these huge lumps of countries. The only site that takes it a step further in terms of having a much more nuanced breakdown of things is Living DNA. The only thing with that, I think, is there's still a question mark of how reliable are those results, because I'm not sure if I've ever seen they've released a white paper. So I'll need to look into that. If anyone knows if they've released a white paper, comment below. I'd like to see it. Post a link, that'd be even better. But let's continue.
As far as that goes, that's just crazy to me. So I do want to delve into that, at least into Nigeria. But yeah, I'm so excited that I got to take this journey, that I got to, in my quest to find out more about me, I saw this big family mystery, and I'm kind of proud that it was me that was able to do the investigative stuff and figure that out. So I'm happy. I'm gonna start doing more vlogs like this. I want to get into more discussions about, just race, ethnicity, identity, culture, and especially and particularly for mixed people, and the differences in being, multi-generationally mixed versus biracial. There's different layers to all of that.
It's an interesting point of multi-generational mixing versus biracial, of just having, one parent that's mostly one thing and one parent that's mostly the other. And that's actually not something I've really considered before. So that is kind of an interesting thing to look at, especially, I guess, in the idea, especially in America, of what cultures you fit into. And this obviously fits very well into the conversation coming out of the video from last week, the Jubilee, who's the blackest ranking, where they used DNA to try to do it, but then talked about it more culturally, while still recognizing the ancestral aspect of it too. But very, very interesting thing to kind of consider of, what is that kind of experience, and especially what does that mean for you? Because, she has been talking a lot about how she's really, really connecting with this Nicaraguan side and her African ancestry and her French ancestry. And it kind of reminds me of when I've been doing genealogy over the years. I started out very specifically focused on my Sephardic ancestry. I had general interest in the other ancestry too, but my main focus was like, oh, my Nunes Vaz family and, this interesting ancestry that I can trace back to Spain and Portugal and go through all these countries and stuff. But then over time, there would be things that would change my focus to other parts of the family, and all of a sudden it became like each branch of the family, as I would delve into it and really draw it out, there was always something about each ancestral part of my tree that once I kind of figured out the story, I felt a better connection to it than I had ever before. And at this point, for pretty much all of my family lines, I feel like I have this really strong connection. I think it especially helps when you do a lot of stuff like what I do and what she did, where you actually find the relatives from these sides and connect with people you never knew before, but share large amounts of DNA with you because you have shared ancestry. So it's an interesting thing of kind of what she's talking about. And I do wonder as she goes along her journey, probably doing more genealogy, I would hope, and building out the family tree because she obviously knows exactly what to do. She's doing it very well. So, hopefully that as she continues, maybe she will find connections to some of these other parts of her ancestry that she doesn't feel as connected to now necessarily.
I mean, at the end of the day, all of it falls under the umbrella of being Black. And I feel like the climate today is kind of trying to change how we look at that. It's always been a one drop rule, which I don't agree with that either. I don't agree with the one drop rule. But it's also weird to me how I'm starting to see a lot of Blacks not really want to include mixed people. Like I'll see so and so being like, oh, Zendaya is a beautiful Black woman, and someone will be like, she's not Black, she's biracial, or so and so is no, they're not Black, they're mixed. And it's like I remember back in my day, because I'm old. Back in my day, if you was mixed with Black, you were Black. So I never heard growing up, oh, they're not Black, they mixed. So it's all this stuff is evolving, and it's just interesting to see it and to watch definitions change and perceptions change, and it's interesting. It's not good or bad to me. It's interesting. I've always been interested in things of that nature, and I think I'm a good person to talk about it. I think I am the poster child for it.
Okay, that was a really good video. I was getting a little worried there that she wasn't going to show anything on screen. I was a little sad she didn't show any of the matches, but it was great that she was talking about the matches she found. She did mention percentage amount of how much she was matching, or her mom was matching her half aunt, or her mom's half aunt and her great half aunt. Yeah. I definitely hope she keeps up with it and especially, expands upon her genealogy and starts building that stuff out because, she's going through the exact process that I think most people that catch the genealogy bug do. And being that she's doing the genetic genealogy side and doing it quite well, especially having solved a family mystery, that's the perfect way to start kind of being like, really obsessing with the family history. But I do really think that her point about, multi-generational mixture families versus a biracial mixture family or something is very kind of interesting to think about. Her results really fall in line with basically what I was thinking of in terms of her having Creole ancestry. Made a lot of sense, having a large amount with the French representation, large amount with the African percentage being over 50%, and then obviously having that small percentage of Native American, which I think maybe I was thinking might be a bit more, but still falling pretty in line with what I've experienced in that not all Creole or Cajun people have a large amount of Native American ancestry, but it is very common for them to have some. I think it'd be really interesting to see some sort of a collaboration between Creole Lady Marmalade and NYTN Daniel Romero, who I've done a couple of reactions to her videos because they both come from kind of a similar ancestry but different parts of it. At least it seems to be, because Danielle comes from that Cajun Creole ancestry as well, but it seems to be much more on the higher amount of Native American side. Whereas here, it seems like she's much more on that African French side of things. Granted, I think both of them have all of the same mixture. It's just different amounts. Where Danielle, I think, has a lower amount of African, much higher amount of Native American. Whereas here with Creole Lady Marmalade, I think her name was Dominique, she had the higher African. But going along that lines too, it'd be interesting to do kind of an overview of their matches to see how much is endogamy within these populations affecting how their matches are matching. Because endogamy makes it so that everyone from that population group matches everyone else from that same population group at higher amounts than typical. So what you typically see for someone that's a second cousin, if you come from an endogamous population, they may actually look more genetically like a first cousin. So they're going to share a little bit higher of an amount. Now, it's not always that kind of a crazy amount of a bump on how they're going to look, but it will make things, especially for the more distant relations, is it a third cousin, a fourth cousin, a fifth cousin? It's a lot harder to try to figure that out. It's already pretty difficult with the ranges that you have now, but when you put the endogamy to it, it makes those ranges even wider and thus more difficult to decipher. But I'd also be interested to see, are they coming up as matches to each other? Because for a lot of endogamous populations, it's very common to find almost everybody else from that population in your match list. Granted, a lot of them, when you find them, they're going to be really small matches. Now, I noticed that this was one video of many that she has dealing with DNA and her results, and it looked like there was one that was a really long video, but it's like her mom, and I think maybe even her grandmother that tests, or maybe, I feel like it said 4 generations. So if you want me to react to that one too, comment below. Or if there's another one of hers that you'd want me to react to, comment below which one you'd want, because I think I will. But if you enjoyed this reaction and you want to watch more reactions I do, be sure to check out this other one right here. Thank you to my Patreon patrons and YouTube members.